Hello everyone, I'm Clayton.
And I'm Darren.
And this is another Gone Kayaking, this time a day trip along the Jurassic coast. This is part 1 of 2, and the first trip being from Studland right through to Worbarrow Bay. And once again, you went without me.
Indeed, you really need to sort yourself out.
It was one of those days. I did have some work to do. I'm not making excuses, people. You will see me on one of these one day, I'm sure of it. But for now, though, it was you and Captain Chris, CC3PO. That will become relevant later. But what a start. Looks pretty calm, but the weather wasn't great.
No, it was very calm. We had a little bit of rain as we started, hence the damp all over the camera, which is always good. But we were starting actually just before the high tide here, so we get the slack.
This is one of those trips that a lot of people that like to sea kayak would like to make, and there are a lot of considerations to take, aren't there, before making a trip like this. What was the planning? What went into it to make it a safe trip?
A few considerations. The main one being there's a lot of stretches that are quite long, several miles long, where you can't get out. The cliff comes straight down to the water like we saw at the Needles on the Isle of Wight trip. So you need to be prepared to cover those distances without having to stop. You also need to be prepared for any sort of self-rescues and the like, where you can't head to the beach and drain your boat or all this sort of thing. But the tide's obviously also enormously relevant. You'll see later as we get to St Alban Head, we go through the tide race there, and it was quite rough, and that was with virtually no wind, so it's just the tide flow.
Whereabouts are we now?
This is Old Harry Rocks now, so we were coming through the rocks, where on our previous visit here we were at low tide, so we actually had to climb up all over this bit, but we can paddle through it today.
With the high tide, very nice. You get a little bit closer to Old Harry.
Absolutely. Captain Chris went round the outside. He seemed a bit more concerned about scratching his bottom.
That's because it's his boat. You got a loaner from P&H, so I guess you weren't quite so considerate.
I can say nothing.
Although we might just hear you not saying something here at the moment. This got alarmingly shallow.
Yeah, we're a bit short of water here, but all was well.
Well, that's what they're designed for. A little bit of rough and tumble never hurt a decent quality kayak. And being you, Darren, those have to be explored, don't they?
You've got to try them all. You don't want to pass by these bits.
Well, do you know what? It reminds me, actually, I was very fortunate. I went to Egypt, did some work out there, and I got to see the pyramids. And I stood there and I looked at them and I thought, oh, that's amazing. And it didn't occur to me until after I left. I could have actually stood on it. I could have touched it. That's how close you can get. And luckily I got to go again, and the first thing I did was went up and I went and touched one of them, because like you just kind of that British way of like, oh, that's nice, but which I can understand with Captain Chris is like, oh, that's nice, and then going around the outside and not going through. But just typical you is like, no, let's go and see this, let's do that, another little arch you've got to go through. Yeah,
we got Captain Chris through this one, couldn't resist it.
It's just phenomenal, isn't it? What a great view. You can understand why people want to make this particular trip along the Jurassic coast. And you've gone from keeping the coast on your right. Some people might come and do it the other way. If they were to do it and keeping the coast on their left, what considerations are there for that?
Well, we were actually planning exactly that. We changed our mind very early on that day because the wind had turned around overnight. So we were actually planning to get the tide in the opposite direction. The main consideration from our point of view would have been starting at Bowleaze would have got us to St Alban Head at a time that wasn't so predictable, because we would have covered such a large distance before it. So any delays we would have got there, and we couldn't really predict where that slack tide would have fallen.
So a nice call, a good call, late call, and sometimes that has to be made, doesn't it?
It meant we had the wind and the tide with us, whereas if we'd gone the opposite way, we would have had a little bit of wind in our face.
But with all these things, it's got to be as pleasant as possible as well, hasn't it, really? That's the idea.
It's got to be pleasant, yeah. You've got to remember it for the right reasons.
Yes, not getting close-ups of the fish. Mind you, it's still a bit of chop, and there's plenty of other people out using the water.
Yeah, we had some jet ski interaction here. They decided it would be fun to spend 10 minutes just buzzing around us, which was really very relaxing. Obviously, it's exactly why we go kayaking, to have jet skis around.
Well, what can you say? Those idiots on jet skis. No, sorry, that doesn't apply to any of you watching this who have a jet ski, but also kayak, because you're not idiots. Again, although the weather's still not great, I mean, you've got a bit further out from the coastline. What was the reason behind that?
Well, this is just cutting Swanage Bay out now, so we didn't go right into the bay. We knew we were going to be pushed for time if we tucked into absolutely everything of interest, so we went straight past the end of Swanage. So we're now coming up to Peveril Point, where you've got a small tide race, and we'll see in a second that kicks up a few little waves. It's not particularly exciting, but they're there all the same.
For the newbie kayakers, when you talk about a tide race, what do you mean by that?
It's really where, in the context of what we're seeing here, the little point on the right there, that point continues under the water. So you've got a shelf coming out from the land, and as the tide flows over that, it creates a bit of turbulence on the top.
So we get a little bit of break, get a little bit of white caps every now and again. And it's not exactly calm, but as you say, not overly exciting.
But the thing to bear in mind is that this is a day with virtually no wind, and we've timed this to be very close to the slack. So in reality, if you were to come back here the same day, 2 or 3 hours later, that would be an awful lot rougher. And if you added some wind to that, it can very quickly get unpleasant.
And so far then, the only place you could have stopped was going across Swanage.
Swanage we could have stopped, but yeah, this section here, after leaving Anvil Point and coming towards Dancing Ledge, there's a whole long section there of several miles. I forget how far exactly, but there's several miles that you can't stop.
And you didn't even dare go and have a look in there, did you?
I didn't. It doesn't actually go back in very far. I went up close because there were a load of guillemots and other little birds flying in and out of there.
And that wasn't for you just to disturb them, you just wanted to have a look.
Exactly, just want to have a look. You can see them there sort of jumping in and out.
Any seals on this one?
No seals. You'll see later we found a little snorkeler, but that's on episode 2. Hey!
Bit of snorkel action, people. Episode 2.
Perfectly normal. So this is St Alban Head. So as we mentioned, we're coming here. We're not far actually after the slack here, but again this is with no wind. So we've got probably 3 or 4 feet of waves in our face here, and this is tucked right in by the coast. So we're in what's by far the calmest part of this tide race. And as we move the camera around to the side in a second, you'll see further out it was actually breaking quite severely. So it could be a pretty unpleasant place if we could get this one wrong.
Yeah, there's nowhere to bail out, as you already mentioned. You can't get off and just decide, right, I'm going to get onto land. There's nowhere to get on.
No.
But you're going with the tide, you're going with the wind, but even so, it's and that's quite pleasant because you're going up and down as opposed to going across it. You're going through it, which is a little bit easier.
Yep, this is true.
But yeah, there's some nice waves.
Yeah, they were pretty docile on the day, but like I say, if you had more tide flow and a bit of wind, that can very, very quickly change. You would have quite significant waves breaking over you and soon run out of fun.
And this is where you need you need all of your essentials that you take with you when you're kayaking. Or what did you have with you?
I take a tow rope with me. I have a paddle float. I can Eskimo roll, but that's still not too proud to have a paddle float. Always got the bilge pump, have a VHF radio, spare paddle.
You mentioned the VHF radio, and I know you mentioned it. We've mentioned it on a previous show, but just okay. So I've got a VHF radio. What does that mean, and what's so special about that?
Well, many people might talk about taking a mobile phone, but the first challenge is trying to get a mobile phone working when your hands are wet. Even through a plastic bag, chances are it's not going to do anything. Also, chances are you've got no signal, so you don't have to be very far from the shore or in fairly isolated places, and your signal will disappear. So the VHF radio should, in theory, talk to anyone who's listening on channel 16 around close by.
And that's the little antenna you've got just sticking out of your life jacket there, isn't it?
It is indeed.
So it's close to hand, you can get to it in an instant. And as you mentioned, channel 16, why channel 16?
That's the call channel.
And that will go to who?
anyone that's listening, I mean, the Coast Guard should be, but this is a small handheld radio. You're down close to the water, so your range is quite limited. So you better chance of being picked up by a boat in the area rather than the Coast Guard further down the coast.
And that wasn't a safety boat behind you, just someone you happened to be out racing.
It was a little Wayfarer dinghy. They were very bold, actually. We were tag teaming, actually, and kept overtaking each other along the way, and they looked to be going all the way to Weymouth.
That could be a next trip, isn't it? Trip to Weymouth.
Could be. Well, we were virtually there this time, actually. It was just more interesting to go to Bowleaze.
No, it's safe to say we live in a beautiful part of the UK with the access to the Solent, access to the Jurassic Coast, access to the Needles, access to wherever we want to go. What do you enjoy about it?
For me, I mean, certainly on this trip, it was the wild side of it. Walk on the wild side, sir. But it was very unique, this bit of coast.
And for you, in terms then of highlights and places that you've been kayaking to, how does this compare, this particular trip?
It's way up there. It's definitely one of the most, if not the most scenic I've done. It's certainly one of the wildest ones. Some of these places are completely inaccessible by land, so even by boat I'm sure we were seeing places that you couldn't get to unless you're in a kayak. Even a small yacht couldn't get to.
Interesting bit of greenery.
Indeed. Yeah, mermaid's hair or something, but we'd passed Chapman's Pool there. We didn't really have time to go the dog leg right into this bay, so we cut straight across the bay. But for whatever reason, there's this huge reef with this weird weed, a bit alien.
Didn't clog you up at all then?
Well, the rudder's spring-loaded, but you can hear it banging against the boat if you listen carefully. It's very exciting to hear. Not.
That's the excitement, going through the mermaid's hair. And quite calm. It's amazing, isn't it, how suddenly we're going from that little bit of chop, and now it's almost like it's glass-like, and then again we're back into a different set of circumstances, different conditions. Yep,
I mean, where we were glassy calm there, that's partly because it was, I guess, fairly shallow over a reef, and the weed will help calm the surface a little bit. But you can see here there's still not really much swell, which really reinforces that what we saw previously was all from the tide race rather than weather conditions.
And what speeds were you and Captain Chris getting up to, do you think?
Our average speed over the whole trip was about 4.5 knots, so not breathtaking. At times we were touching 7 or 8 knots, I remember, as we went around St Alban Head. This was the wake off a passing boat that we decided we'd try and grab just off Kimmeridge. We sort of surfed a little bit, but it wasn't breathtaking.
I think it probably was for Captain Chris.
No, he's a whole new captain now with this new toy.
Yeah, look at it. He's a different man, isn't he? Now he's got his sit on.
Yeah, mind you saying that, we just at this point as we were coming off this also pretty amazing piece of coastline, it was quite unique. He broke a rudder line, which was a pretty impressive development.
That's not easy to do, is it?
It is for him. He actually broke 2 on this trip.
Oh dear. Well, it's funnily enough though, for Captain Chris, it's good for him because obviously he's gone out with MacGyver. You must have been able to fix that, no problem at all.
Well, you'll see later actually when we got into Lulworth, as he broke the second one while he was fixing his rudder, I decided to play with the drone because that was really helpful.
Yeah, you broke it, you fix it.
It was a little bit like that. Mind you, I didn't have any tools. Thankfully he did, otherwise we would have been banging it with stones.
It is fascinating, isn't it? The more these are views of the coastline we don't normally get to see. The stuff you get to see are taken from aerial shots and quite high up and so on. But to be able to get as close as you are and to see, it's incredible. And it almost looks like they just sandwiched it all up and just sort of. You're going to come up to a bit in a moment where it looks like they put the land on its side.
Indeed. Well, that whole piece of coast we sort of had to trim an awful lot out just to keep the video a little bit shorter, but that went on for miles in that scene with the green grass and the sort of folded layers of land. It was quite fascinating.
Yeah, we might well put up just an unedited version with just some music on, and just so you can, for those of you that really like this kind of thing, and just see that coastline and enjoy it. And for those people that are thinking of making this trip and wanting to do it and wondering what they need to take into account besides the things we've talked about, is there anything else they need to be? Look at that, that's just incredible. It's like a sandwich, it's like a viennetta.
It's no chocolate.
No, it could get a bit coke brain though, I guess, if you got too close to it in some bad conditions. And then a little bit of experimental, a little bit of Jacques Cousteau going on here. What's all this?
Just checking out what's underwater. So what's worth watching out for is a dead leg when you go on these trips. It can happen.
Yeah, this is where CC Captain Chris goes into CC 3PO mode.
This place is dangerous. Oh my! I'm backward! I'm done for.
Oh my goodness.
It's hard not to laugh. I'm trying, not hard though.
Not only that, but there was somebody on the shore who was watching, so that wasn't at all embarrassing for him. First pit stop made, 15 miles, 3.5 hours-ish. That brings us to the end of part 1. Hope you've enjoyed that video. Please feel free to like and subscribe and even share this video if you haven't already done so. From us at Gone Kayaking, we'll see you in part 2.